saw today that Jack Smith is taking steps to wind down the federal cases against Donald Trump. I mean, it's academic that they wouldn't continue. But what I wanted to ask you is there a legal way in which he might be unwinding these cases that might allow them to be reanimated later? I mean, why not just, hey, just leave him and let him, dry on the vine?
Well, I think that there's a certain procedure he has to follow, Mark, and he wants to write a report. And normally you're supposed to write the report at the end of the investigation. Now, I don't see why. I haven't read the rules, carefully in detail, but it would seem to me that he could start writing the report right now, and that would be very smart. And that could be a public report where he would lay out all the things that he learned in his investigation. And we saw that in other cases, Mark. I think from the Mueller investigation, there was a report. God knows how many people read it. They pretty much read Barr's truncated, really twisted
summary,
executive summary. But anyway, he should write a report. And, time's ticking, and he needs to get started on that report. Now, he seems to think that he's going to save, from the reporting, that he's going to save Trump the turmoil of actually pulling the plug on him. And I have no idea why he ought to do that. He ought to write his report. I think he ought to proceed on. And if 2 hours after the inauguration on January 20th, he's fired, he's fired. If Trump purports to dismiss the case with prejudice, maybe that has to go in front of the judges to decide whether it should be dismissed with prejudice or not. And maybe the one down in Florida will dismiss it with prejudice, but maybe the one in Washington, D.C. won't. And then it would potentially stay there to be revived. It wouldn't be dismissed with prejudice. They'd probably appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court that it should be dismissed with prejudice because there's nobody to prosecute it. But, it's one of the major investigations by the Department of Justice. It's not a nothing burger. This is the January 6th one, and this is keeping documents, obstructing justice, and trying to return them in the second case. These are major federal investigations. And so I think that what ought to happen, and again, I haven't parsed the rules, he ought to start writing the report. I think that he should pursue the appeals. If let's say there's an oral argument on January 10th, he ought to go to the oral argument and argue. He ought to do everything with the case. It's not set for trial before January 20th. So my recommendation is he do everything with the case, including write the report, keep up with all the deadlines. He's the prosecutor on the case. And on January 20th, a couple of things will happen. He will purport to fire him. I don't know the president can just fire a special prosecutor. I think the head of the Department of Justice has to fire him. So it may be that he has to put in an attorney general and make that attorney general walk the plank. That attorney general, let's say it's Judge Cannon. Right. Let Judge Cannon walk the plank as attorney general and fire him. That's kind of hard on some of the people in his office because you're waiting for what will, in one sense, be the inevitable. He won't be around a few months from now, one way or the other. But let Trump and Trump's attorney general carry the ball. This idea that, well, I know that you said in a campaign speech or you said in your acceptance speech or something like that you want to get rid of me. We have forms and processes, right, Mark? And he ought to make Trump and his attorney general walk the plank and make the courts rule on that matter.
This is fascinating because I have not heard it anywhere else. The notion somehow that, hey, it's going to be noisy to fire Jack Smith and get rid of these cases. Make them make that noise. And
that's why you invite me on, Mark. To do some original legal analysis on some of these major issues. But that's my take on it.
Yeah, absolutely terrific.
This idea that the Democrats don't want to do anything noisily. Look at how noisily Trump and his minions do everything. And guess what? The public kind of likes it. The public, including the base, as well as some of the swing voters. They want someone who's going to stand up and say, look, there are certain things that have to be done in a certain way. And no, I'm not just going to, be so, whatever you want to call it, discreet about it. Now, Jack Smith, he's appointed right now. He's the person who's in charge. And he's, one thing that's interesting is that President Biden kept on this guy Denham or Durham, who was investigating members of Biden's administration and people close to Biden. And because he was such an institutionalist, Mark, Biden kept him on. that guy actually, issued his report and everything else. Now, the argument on the other side is that what Jack Smith is there to do is to prosecute a president, and under presidential immunity, as well as under that famous DOJ opinion that kind of hamstrung Mueller, especially in Mueller's opinion, you can't proceed and prosecute a sitting president. And so as of January 20th, he'll be a sitting president. But again, let it be noisy. Let it be, I wouldn't say noisy, but so much, let it be according to the rules. Jack Smith, stickler for the rules, go with the rules and make Trump and Trump's attorney general walk the plank. And if there's court challenges to it that can be made in good faith, then Jack Smith ought to defend himself in good faith.
Noisy was my term because I like that it will get attention. And I think that's kind of what you're saying. Hey, make them go through the process that will get attention and take America through what's actually happening. I get it. It may now be academic that these things are going away, but let's see them go away in the light of day as opposed to them vanishing in the darkness.
One interesting detail is that he's also prosecuting two people who aren't the president down in the Southern District of Florida, right? And whether he's properly appointed or not is a live issue in that case. If he wasn't properly appointed under the law, then as special prosecutor, he can't proceed against the two people not named Trump who are charged criminally in federal court by him. And so I think all of that is not moot. And we get a ruling from the 11th Circuit. Now, again, Trump could just simply purport to fire him, and there would and tell his attorney general and his U.S. attorney down there in the Southern District of Florida not to pursue the case any longer. It might be that the courts, especially the 11th Circuit, would appoint a lawyer because that position has a right to be heard. The U.S. Supreme Court just did that in one of its cases where they actually got the attorney general of some red state to agree with the Department of Justice. And this U.S. Supreme Court said, oh my God, no one is defending the other side of it. And they appointed someone. So it might be that they would appoint a lawyer, some very good lawyer, to carry the ball and to defend the fact that Jack Smith was properly appointed and that the prosecution of those two people who worked at the Trump property down there, Mar-a-Lago, that prosecution could go forward. So stay tuned. This one yet may be real interesting.
So we've received a bunch of comments along the way, and whenever we get something that's sort of in the legal category, we put it to the side to ask you about it on Thursdays. And so it is with this next couple of questions. Phineas asked, should Jack Smith, and this is when this, I think you have to take off your lawyer hat because this is, I think, really a violation of legal ethics. But Phineas asks, should Jack Smith leak all the evidence he has on Trump, maybe release an unredacted Mueller report type thing?
Well, obviously he can't do that, and he won't do that, Mark. But, the public report can be full of a lot of details. The idea of these special prosecutors is to bring to light things. So, there's obviously some, measured way that it's done. But as I recall, the special prosecutor report about President Clinton mentioned, and this was supposed to be now Justice Kavanaugh's contribution to independent counseldom, the fact that the cigar and Monica, and where former President Clinton supposedly put the cigar. And that was released in a publicly released report. So that's the Kavanaugh standard of what ought to be in a special counsel report. And I think obviously once you set a precedent, you set a precedent for all time. That's why people are reluctant to set precedents, because guess what? The other party, the so-called other side, will follow through with the precedents that you set. What's good for the goose is good for the gander.
I love that example. Wow. Yeah, it reminds me of the Ken Starr hit job that was supported by now, as you say, Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Here is and wow, that would the report that would have that same kind of hit job quality that Ken Starr offered up on Bill Clinton. It would be damning. Again, with Trump, nothing sticks to him, but nonetheless, it would be revealing, I'm sure. So this is another one from our audience. Joan asked, can Biden pardon all the people Trump says he wants to put in jail? Can he preemptively give all of these people some sort of legal cover?
Well, I hope people keep sending in their questions, because that's a great one. It's a provocative and great question, because President Ford gave former President Nixon a preemptive pardon. Nixon was not indicted for anything. He hadn't been placed under arrest or released by a court or anything. And it was a very broadly worded preemptive pardon. I think the better part of valor, and I know that people think this isn't Biden's style, but maybe in the last 2 months, he should develop this style. When your opponent says something, believe him. When Trump says something, believe his words. So certainly Biden has the power in these next 2 months to craft pardons that are specific to Trump's statements. So you mentioned the fact that he said that Liz Cheney ought to be pardoned for treason. He
ought to be prosecuted. Yeah.
What did I say? Sorry.
Pardoned. Yeah, you said.
Oh,
pardoned.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
That she should be prosecuted for treason. He's made very specific comments of who should be arrested for what. This Judge Enderon, who presided over the state case, where a very large verdict was returned against him, hundreds of millions of dollars. And that is a total violation of the rule of law, of what we believe in this country, to go around, and not because you have appellate issues, but because you don't like the judge, to say that they ought to be arrested and prosecuted. So number one, President Biden has the power to do it. And number two, I think that he should follow the example that Ford followed regarding Nixon. And he should give all of those people pardons that should be broadly worded and that should encompass what Trump himself has said that he would prosecute those people for, because they shouldn't have that sword of Damocles hanging over their head. There's just no reason for it. Now, one of the ways Ford was quite popular when he issued the pardon, about 70% popularity. He might have gone down anyway. He went down to about 50%, and he ultimately lost to Jimmy Carter in 1976. And a lot of people attributed that to the pardon that Ford had entered. Remember this, Biden's not running for any office anytime in the future. So even if it were politically unpopular with some people, that really shouldn't give him that much pause, especially because, Mark, I think it's needed. Some of those people would have a hell of a time defending themselves. Now, he shouldn't pardon himself. And I certainly don't think that he needs to pardon Kamala Harris. But some of the people below that, some of the people you mentioned on your list, and maybe to include Milley and other people, because at the very least, Trump could bankrupt them, putting them through legal proceedings. It's so expensive. And to defend yourself against the Department of Justice, and once the Department of Justice gets going, they stick to these cases like a dog with a bone. Even sometimes when you present exculpatory evidence, you present other things, it becomes just, they're very, very invested in it. And especially with Trump in office and with Trump's attorney general, God knows who that's going to be, they might really not let go of some of those people. And as I say, Trump has specifically said that he's going to arrest or prosecute these people for X and Y. So I think he should write a pardon. Now, here's the interesting thing. The way that Ford defended himself, especially after he left office, was that he said by accepting the pardon, Nixon implicitly accepted that he'd done something wrong. And he quoted a 100-year-old Supreme Court case. If I were one of those people, I would take the pardon. And when anybody said to me, well, that's almost like saying you did it, why did you accept the pardon? I accepted the pardon because Trump gave a speech where he said he was going to do X and Y to me, and I was given a pardon for X and Y. They're as frivolous as the day is long, but I was relieved of having to pay hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars for a lawyer. Last thing on that is that it hasn't gone to the U.S. Supreme Court. It wasn't tested, right? And no one, Nixon got the pardon. The electorate was upset. Jimmy Carter was elected, but it was never challenged in the courts. Presumably, somebody, let's say it's Letitia James, that New York Attorney General, who doesn't seem to be worthy of prosecution for anything, but she's been repeatedly threatened with prosecution by Trump. Let's assume he prosecutes her anyway. Let's assume that he goes and tries to prosecute Fani Willis. Okay, you want to keep prosecuting me down in state court? I can't give myself a pardon or give the other people a pardon, but guess what? You prosecuted me, I'm prosecuting you. So he does it anyway. Fani Willis could walk into court with her pardon. And I think that it would absolutely be affirmed, including by this U.S. Supreme Court, because they've allowed these pardons, Mark, where there's just no recourse. It's just one of those plenary powers that a president has. And the very last thing, if you went back to the list of people that Trump pardoned, some of them were absolute lowlifes. Some of them have gotten in criminal trouble again since he gave them the pardon just about 4 years ago. And none of these people are lowlifes. These are really reputable, respectable people as you go up and down that list. The 51 intelligence officers whose opinion was that it was Russian disinformation. It looked like it could have been Russian disinformation, the Hunter Biden laptop. So I think he should issue the pardons, and I think that they should take the pardons. And I don't think that he'll probably do that. He will pardon Hunter Biden for sure.
Yeah, you've always said that, and that appears
or commute the sentence. Or commute the sentence. He's coming up for sentencing, Mark, and it may be that he'll look and see what the sentencing is. It'll be before January 20th. If President Biden can live with the sentence for his son. But if it's a matter of going to see his son in the penitentiary every weekend, I don't think he's going to allow his son to go to the penitentiary.
I have a controversial follow-up, but I'm going to put it to the side for a second, but I will get to it. I just want to mention that he wants to go after all the members of the January 6th Select Committee, singling out Cheney in particular, of course, but he wants to go, he calls them political hacks and thugs, and he calls them people who should be tried for fraud and treason. And again, of course, Trump, of course, wants to come into power and pardon all the J6 people who have been convicted. Not all of them, but he said he would consider pardoning many of them.
You think some of them will be a step too far, a bridge too far for him? Because, one thing that we're going to have is an incredibly vigorous media. The idea that, there's no recourse. Kim and I were around on Pat Thurston's show commenting about 2 or 3 times a week on what Trump was doing back when he had the Senate and he had the House. It's still, it's still up in the air, but it looks like he'll probably have the House. He'll have the trifecta. He had the trifecta in those years, and the media was very active, and the media will still be very active. And every time he does something outrageous, it'll be front page news. So there's a lot of checks, as well as in our judiciary. The judiciary has 4 years of his appointees. Some of them are very good, but it also has 4 years of Biden's appointees. So I put a lot of trust in the federal courts to rein things in. All those civil liberties groups and so forth, and right-wing groups that brought all these challenges in the courts when Biden was in there, they haven't gone anywhere. They're going to bring all their challenges and go try to get their injunctions, all the things that Trump does. Next 4 years.
Unlike last time, though, the media, there might be members of the media that are frightened because of this retribution tour, because they may be at risk. And Trump is threatening to pull licenses from major media networks. That there might be some tamped down journalism going on because of fear. And that's my worry.
Kim, you, me, Pat Thurston, Mark here, we weren't intimidated. He had the trifecta then. No. He made threats all the time then. I just think that, this idea that he's going to do anything with CBS's license, are you kidding? CBS will win any of those kind of proceedings in a minute. I think the reason that, Bezos, for instance, didn't allow that Washington Post editorial to be published. I think Bezos would say, I lose money on the Washington Post. You guys have to understand, I can't give up my whole financial empire because of what's put in the Washington Post. I'm losing money on the Washington Post. If somebody wants to come along and pay me a higher price than the Washington Post, they can have it. So I think he didn't want to lose more money, and he wanted to keep good relations with Trump. You can say we should have a rule of law where the huge business interests don't care who's the president and what their relationship is with the president. That's not the real world. Why would they spend all that money on lobbyists and everything else if they thought there was such a clear rule of law and such fair competitive things that their companies would do as well, no matter who was in power, no matter who the personalities were? So I kind of forgive Bezos on that. And anyone who's canceling their Washington Post subscription, they're like the Arab American voters in Michigan, a lot of them. They're cutting off their nose to spite their face.
I said the same thing here when it happened. I can't understand it. I get it. Back in the day, it was the thing that you endorsed the opinion people as the editorial staff, different from the reporters and those who handle the rest of the paper. They come up with a decision as to an endorsement. Times are different, and we are desperate for the kind of reporting that goes on at the Washington Post, for example, the LA Times. I know people, they whip the LA Times. I don't know why. I'm grateful for a lot of the information. These are Pulitzer Prize winners this year for some big stories that have nothing to do with politics. They have to do with the toxic waste dumping and DDT was dumped by the military and all the rest of this stuff. If you want journalism, God damn it, you've got to support it. I subscribe to so many papers and magazines and Substacks, and it's astounding the bills I get every month. But I do it for this show and also to support independent journalism and even institutional journalism. So I'm with you 100% on that, David Katz. I do. If you canceled your subscription to the Washington Post and everybody's peacocking about, I canceled it, you ought to resubscribe, because that's real journalism those people are doing. Now, here's my controversial question. The controversial question is, might, in a huge right turn, any one of these ongoing cases from New York to Georgia make a deal with Donald Trump, an 11th hour deal, given the fact that he is ascending to a position of such immense power? Might there be pressure to, in some way, and again, when I say in some way, I have no idea. That's why you're the lawyer and I'm just the guy asking the question. In some way, make this go away for Donald Trump, the legal encumbrance?
Well, as to the two federal cases, the one in Mar-a-Lago over the documents that Trump kept and obstructed justice, it appears, not to return, and had people make false statements to the government, which is a federal crime, about did he have them, where were they, how many did he have? And these were the ones with the big seals on them right there that said they were national security secrets. That case is going away, Mark. We just talked about the different ways that it could happen. They could pursue the case against the two, and if nobody ever gets it dismissed with prejudice, it could rear its ugly head, I suppose, in 4 years, because it's been, it's been filed within the statute of limitations. And if this litigation goes on for 4 years, yes, it could spring back into life. Likewise, with the case in Washington, D.C., the January 6th case, and the not tamping down the violence, the slates, all of the things that happened in 2016, including the call into Georgia, which is recorded as part of that federal case. But that one's going away too, as to Trump, or, best case scenario, it could be revived in 4 years because it wasn't dismissed with prejudice. The state case in New York, that's what the Trump legal team is doing right now. They're trying to get that continued. And that one's very interesting. I'm glad that you asked about it. Let me just take a minute. He's supposed to be sentenced, I think it's November 26th. That's been delayed. And what happened in that case was that his legal team didn't ask during the period of time to file motions. They didn't ask the judge to do anything about the fact that maybe there was this thing called presidential immunity. About a week before the trial, they said, hey, Trump has presidential immunity, and they filed a motion. The judge up there correctly said, I have a motion schedule for a reason. You have to file the motions within the time. You sandbagged me. You're trying to delay the trial now by sandbagging me, and I'm not hearing this motion, or I'm denying it because it's untimely. Well, that's very nice. He denied it because it was untimely, but look where we are right now. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled there is a thing called presidential immunity. It covers both the state and the federal. You can't just say, oh, well, you're federally immune, so we'll ask our friends over in state court to charge you with the same thing, but we'll style it under state law. No, presidential immunity from the U.S. Supreme Court covers the state courts too. So the judge is going to have to deal with that. And I think he'll do one of a couple of things. He'll either just say, you know what, presidential immunity covers this. Remember, this is the falsification of the records, Mark, that Trump was writing those checks from the Oval Office. Now, you could say it's all pre-presidential conduct. I think that's the better argument. It's pre-presidential conduct, even though it went on, and the conspiracy, part of that conspiracy to falsify the records and to make it look like they were legal expenses when it was hush money to Stormy Daniels, was carried out in the Oval Office, and checks were written while he was president, the monthly checks to Michael Cohen. But, that's not the gravamen of the thing. But I think that something's going to happen. It'll either get dismissed because the judge will say it is presidential immunity. He'll say it won't be dismissed because it isn't, and they'll try to appeal that immediately and go up through the courts, and it'll be in the courts for years.
Okay, wait a minute.
Yeah.
It either will or it won't. I mean, okay, I get it. It either will or it won't. But I was really into your narrative there, that you feel like these negotiations, if I can call them that, they're going on right now between Trump lawyers and the court to somehow press this case. So when you say they either will or you won't, you're saying the judge will make a determination. Okay, I just want to be clear about that.
I don't think any of the lawyers are talking ex parte to the judge.
Okay.
Maybe they're talking to each other. That's usually a prudent thing for lawyers to talk to each other, no matter how much they oppose each other in court. You want to have a conversation or exchange of letters to see what people's positions are. I think that the DA's office up there, this is Alvin Bragg, that they will pursue it. They will say it was untimely. It's not covered by presidential immunity. The fact that he committed some of the acts in the Oval Office, this case was not about something he did as the president, not based on time. The timing of this thing, when this thing really happened, was before he was president, and writing checks to cover up, an affair and to mischaracterize the hush money is not official. This is an example of something that is not an official act. This is not like people say sending SEAL 6 team against the wrong people. And it's awful. It's terrible. It ought to be punishable. But now they made that presidential immunity. Covering up hush money in a personal matter is not part of your official acts. Now, my point was, what will the judge do about it when that argument is made in front of him? And I don't think that judge will say it's untimely. It's just the circumstances have changed. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled. Then it was a prospective thing when he denied it as untimely. Now the U.S. Supreme Court has actually ruled, Mark. And so you've got that. They'll have some reason why it was untimely. They were bringing other motions. But now here we are. You should not impose a sentence because this case is covered by presidential immunity. He's immune from being sentenced today, Your Honor. Don't sentence him. If he doesn't sentence him, then maybe the DA can appeal that. The DA probably will appeal that. And if he does sentence him, Trump, will appeal that. The other things that he could do is to just go ahead and say, I'm denying the motion. I'm sentencing you today. Here's what the sentence is. It could be something like home arrest that he has to serve before he actually becomes president on January 20th. It could be home arrest during that interregnum, but it's just very hard to believe that that's what the judge is going to do. And I don't think there's any chance. You and I talked about this the night of the election. Boy, that was some panel that you had, Mark.
You were great to join us. It was some panel because you joined us too. Thank you.
With all these great political pundits, and we went from 8:30 to 9:30, and it was like the news kept getting worse and worse for Harris as the show went on. But we had a great conversation about that. And at least one of the guests opined that the judge might well send him to prison. And boy, I just don't see that happening, Mark. And I don't see him even putting him on home arrest. This idea that he's going to now address the nation while on home arrest because some Democratic judge whose daughter gave $25 to some Democratic organization or who worked for somebody who worked for Harris. And now I'm cooped up here. I'm the president-elect. I'm trying to have relations with these other foreign leaders. They're all calling me. I'm on home arrest. If you were the judge, would you do that, Mark? This
of course not.
Well.
No, that's why I say.
Why should this judge do it? If normal people wouldn't do it, why should a judge with common sense do that? But if he does sentence him, they'll immediately ask for a stay. And then I think the argument will be that even if the sentence is good, it can't be served for 4 years. I think some court will probably come along and say, you cannot make the president of the United States serve a criminal sentence. Of course, the question is state court. This memorandum in the Department of Justice concerns what federal prosecutors can do to the president. It doesn't really concern that internal DOJ memorandum, what they should do. And if I can touch on one more thing, I just don't think that case in Atlanta is ever going to get put together, either legally or practically, during the next 4 years. And then, of course, the question is going to be what happens to the other people in those cases, because there's a lot of people charged in Georgia. There's a lot of people charged in Arizona, right, who are not Trump, but it's for the things that he did. And, Trump cannot issue a pardon to them. So if they stick to their guns, those cases against the people not named Trump may yet go forward in Georgia or in Arizona. And boy, will there be controversy over that, Mark, the screaming and yelling over that. But, the law proceeds. That's what the rule of law is. Let people yell and scream. They can have demonstrations. Don't interrupt the court proceedings, and the court proceedings go on unless there's legal reason why they shouldn't be going on.
Julie says, I want to be on home arrest at Mar-a-Lago. Life's rough. Quickly, with our last seconds here, the question comes, can Trump serve a third term somehow? Because the argument would be, well, he wouldn't have served 2 consecutive terms, so he could actually have serve another term after this one.
Well, that's a great question. So we have the 22nd Amendment, which was passed in 1951, Mark. It's part of the Constitution. It's in reaction to the fact that FDR ran 4 times. Now, we haven't really had it tested Truman could have tested it because the law hadn't kicked in. So he could have run for a third term. He decided not to. My reading of the Constitution, and I'm pretty sure this is the reading of at least 7 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court, is that he could not serve a third term. The way that it's written, now people say, how about LBJ? LBJ had served a year and a couple of months after JFK was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. But the provision says about this 2-year thing. So LBJ had served less than 2 years. And that's one reason. If LBJ had served even more time than that, it looks like he would have been barred from running in 1968. For people who don't remember it or haven't read about it in the history books, he gave a famous speech in March 1968 where he said, "I will not accept the nomination of my party."
David Katz does the LBJ impression. Very impressive.
Everybody who was old enough to remember it, but he apparently could have run. So my answer is that has also not been tested in the courts. Trump may be the guy who tries to test it, but the language is clear enough. It's not like he served a part of somebody else's term like Truman and LBJ did. He ran once, he won once, he ran a second time, he won a second time. He would have served 2 entire terms. I believe the 22nd Amendment. And you know, the originalists who want to know what the intention was, well, this is the intention of people in 1950 and 51. And it was very clear it was to bar somebody from serving a third term. Last thing, you know, Clinton and Obama were both so popular. There was some talk about, well, maybe we should get another amendment that says that that person can serve a third term. That never went anywhere. Trump is not going to get an amendment. It's too hard to get an amendment. The reality is that it'll be, I think, Vance, and my opinion, somebody from California. And he would get mad at me if he knew I was even suggesting this, but I think Schiff in 4 years from now would be a wonderful moderate candidate who would appeal to a lot of people. The smart money would probably be on Newsom. So all I'm going to say, Katsadamas, somebody from California in 4 years, and that would include Harris again. And she did a great job. Let's just not leave on the note that this was a big mess. People say she should have picked Shapiro. That would have been a better choice. But I think the way that this sort of red little wavelet or whatever you want to call it, I think even with Shapiro, it was just the mood of the country at that time. It was a reaction to some things.
I agree.
You know, that's how elections go. I don't think Shapiro would have been different. I think she ran really well, Mark.
No, I mean, based on what we've seen, I don't think it would have mattered. But that was the Katsadamas prediction caricature there. Artist depiction
Vance against somebody from Vance against somebody from California.
Well, that's the other thing that really, if you accept at least in part the fact that Donald Trump wanted to win because he just wanted to make all of these legal cases go away, and it's now going to invigorate all of his businesses. He has all these. He's going to enrich himself and his family, Trump Inc., in ways that unimaginable. They're all going to do it. Everybody from Ramaswamy to Musk to, I mean, it's going to be, they are going to sack the U.S. Treasury. But that said, he wouldn't have any interest in another term. He's going to turn the keys over to, as you say, J.D. Vance, and we'll see what happens with the future of MAGA. You know, MAGA seems to be a fairly robust political movement, you know, David Katz. And I have to say this, you know, because you mentioned Adam Schiff, now put on your hat as a political strategist and analyst, which you do, I know, on News Nation on the weekends and also around other news outlets occasionally. It seems as though, based on the election returns, that America is moving to the right. I mean, in state after state, David Katz, I think the demographics all across the board are pretty undeniably moving to the right. So when you talk about a middle-of-the-road candidate like Adam Schiff, I think the Democrats have to really sit down and figure out if they're really connected to the country and how they're connected to the country. I know this was a close election, don't get me wrong, but I feel as though when state after state moves that way, you have to respect that movement, don't you?
Well, you know, we had Reagan for 2 terms, and then we had Bush. We had 12 years of Republicans, and then here comes the governor of Arkansas, winsome, likable fellow Clinton, but certainly the New Democrats, certainly in the middle. He went out to Arkansas. There were 2 people who were mentally challenged who had gotten the death penalty. He not only didn't commute there or change or pardon them or anything like that, he went there while they were given the death penalty, and people were like, wow. And he said, I'm going to reform welfare. And he's still very controversial for some of the reforms that he made to welfare. And he let those huge SUVs get built and thrive, and not do a lot about their environmental impacts. And all of those you think were anathema to the Democratic Party. But guess what? After 3 terms, after 12 years of Republicans, here was Bill Clinton winning back the White House. He put RBG on the Supreme Court. I mean, they say he was too conservative, but he found that right balance. And I think, if not Schiff, someone like Schiff who finds that right balance, I don't think the country's really moved right. I think the Democrats got really out of step over the immigration issue. And it just was too much. The thing is always to find a balance. And sometimes ideological, this is my political hat, not my legal one. But I think sometimes that's the problem with ideology. I remember when Bernie Sanders said that everyone should be allowed to vote. All federal inmates should be allowed to vote. And they said, how about the Boston Marathon bombers? Yeah, they should be allowed to vote too. And when he said that, I said, this guy doesn't really want to be president. He wants to be ideologically pure. And, if you want power, you got to think through the fact that, okay, what did they say? What did Clinton used to say? He said, don't let something get in the way of perfect.
Don't let purity be the enemy of the good.
Right, exactly.
Yeah,
so that's I'm very optimistic. I'm very optimistic about the next elections.
Well, the good news is you can hold our hand for the next 4 years and hopefully maintain that optimism.
Let's hope we win the House. Let's hope we win the House. Boy, I tell you, it's close. It doesn't look great right now, but
it does not.
It's still up in the air.
Yeah. Well, we'll check in with you next week. By then we should know, and appreciate all of the ways in which you've offered some real scholarly takes on so many things that are going on legally and politically. It was really great to have you in that mix of people on election night. It was an elevated conversation, and we have such great minds and such great talkers there. I didn't know how we were going to get it all in, but we did, and you were really a big part of it. So thank you so much, David.
Well,
Katz.
It was a wonderful show, and your producer really helped, as well as Kim. It was really well put together, and I think it's available, so people should watch.
Check
David
it out.
K. Johnston was on. Anthony Davis, Rothman, all the heavy hitters were there.
Gil Gross
and you invited me too, and I was there too.
Democrats will have to dial back the woke stuff. Yeah, I see that. Okay, good stuff. David Katz, thank you. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.